Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Inspire Health podcast. And we continue on with our series on detoxification and cleansing. And today we're bringing back the founder and Chief Science Officer of C60 from Purple Power, Ken Swartz. And we've had Ken on several times and talking about different topics. And Ken was on a detox summit a while back. And some of the information that I know they've been putting out on their channel, Tay and I were listening to, and we really liked the information he was talking about and thought that this would be a really good episode to bring him on and break down some of the big picture physiological stuff around toxins. Like, where are they coming from? How are they accumulating in us? What's kind of potentially the problems that's going to come from this bioaccumulation, and sort of break down some of the stuff and give you guys an idea of what you need to be aware of, how to avoid it, how to start to mitigate some of that stuff. So we're going to jump right into it with Ken. So Ken, welcome back to the show.
Oh, glad to be on.
Happy to have you back here again. So when guys were talking, you guys were breaking down a bunch of different stuff. So I thought we will go through this concept of toxins from a physiological perspective. I'm going to bring up some pictures as well to kind of show people. So if you're watching this or if you're listening to this on the podcast, check out the YouTube channel too, so that you can see some of the pictures that'll pop up here as well. But Ken, from your perspective, what's going on with toxins? Like, when you start to think about toxins and detoxification and stuff like that, where are the biggest places that we are accumulating them from? Where are they coming from? Because I think a lot of people hear the word toxins, they know there might be certain things going on, but sometimes I think they don't really get the exact, what do we need to be aware of? Where are we accumulating all of these things from?
Well, the biggest burden of toxins you're probably likely to encounter is already in your home. And that's what people don't understand. There's all these industrial toxins. They've never really been tested for safety. And so what's underneath your sink, in your cleaning closet, even your personal hygiene and other care products you use. These are all, so many of these. I mean, before you even leave the door in the morning, you've been exposed to 300 to 500 toxins. And like in makeup, that's too. I believe you have the dirty, what is that site that can tell you what's in a material?
Yeah, we use the app, the Think Dirty app, and
Yeah.
I'll pop that up here later too. But the Think Dirty app is, you can just download it. I believe it's just a free app too, but you can scan the code on a lot of your different household supplies and chemicals, and like we did on our toothpaste the other day, and I think our toothpaste came up as like a 3, so relatively low on the scale. But I would look to see if we can even get that even lower. And it'll even break down the ingredients. So it'll actually look at your different ingredients within that, and it will give you a rating scale. And the higher the number, the worse, the more toxic it is, up to, I think, 10, 0 being literally nothing. So we were looking at ours and it's like 0, 0, 0. And then a couple of them were like 2 or 3. So a little bit more on the quote unquote toxic side, but pretty low toxicity in comparison to, I think if you do some of the other ones, some of the more name brand, say toothpaste, I think they're right up there, like, 8, 9, as far as the toxic load that you might be accumulating.
Well, yeah, and there was a recent study. It was done by an independent consumer group. You can look it up online. And they went out and just grabbed randomly, consumer products off the grocery store shelves, right? And they tested, and half of them had health-threatening levels of benzene in them. Half of everything out there. And so that's the real problem that people are facing. And you just don't know these things. And of course, sometimes some certain fabrics and carpet off-gas nasty toxins in your house. You said the new car smell. Well, that new car smells volatile organic chemicals, which are really bad for you. So actually, a lot of things, like, let's say you'll get like a mattress cover or some new clothes or something, right? And you have a smell on that stuff. That's, VOTs coming off, those are coming off those things. A lot of times that stuff you need to like take out, put in the garage or outside to let it like vent out before you can use that. But and the thing is, it's all these little things. It's not like one hammer that's smacking you. It's like 1,000 little tiny hammers coming out of 1,000 different things, and that just accumulates. Usually it gets into your body. The body doesn't know how to deal with this. I mean, they've made 80,000 new industrial chemicals that have never existed in nature, and so your body doesn't have a lot of good ways to deal with those. And of course, some things they do is that they just take them and they store it in fat. They say, we don't know what to do with this. Let's just stick it into the fat tissue, which is a real problem, especially if you go on a diet or maybe do intermittent fasting and start lowering your weight. When those chemicals come out of your fat and go into your bloodstream, then they can do problems. And usually it's not the chemical itself. Now, some chemicals go directly to it, like the estrogen imitators, right? That you get those in your plastics a lot and a whole bunch of other stuff. Now, obviously, that's jacking things up there, because what they do is they'll bind to the estrogen receptors or other receptors. They're not just the only type, and then they just bind up to it, so the estrogen receptor can't actually work because it's gummed up. So I mean, those are, but a lot of them also, when they break down, they release oxidative radicals as they break down, because they're high energy things and they snap and then they break, and so then those oxidative radicals go out to cause an inflammatory chain. So there's different ways on the way toxins can get you. And of course, we all know about the heavy metals, which and the other one that most people don't know or should do is fluoride. Because when people talk about T3 and T4, your fluoride, I mean your thyroid, hormones. When the T3 means there's three iodines attached, and the T4 means there's 4 iodines attached. That's what T3 and T4 go. Well, fluoride is in the same chemical family as iodine, so it can attach there. And now that T3 or that T4 is non-functional. So a lot of times you got to try to reduce as much as possible the fluoride. It's interesting that when they had that Operation Paperclip, when they brought the Nazis over here, and they discovered that the Nazis and the Soviets were using like fluoride in their prisoner of war camps. Well, now in most American water supplies, they're using that same level of fluoride as were in Nazi prisoner of war camps here in the States.
The stuff on fluoride has made no sense for so long. I was just reading a paper the other day, and they were talking basically about how there's really no benefit to fluoride, only really problems, yet it still carries on over and over and over again.
Well, they used it in the Nazi prisoner of war camps to keep the prisoners passive, and unable to organize. Kind of maybe it calcifies the pineal gland or whatever it is. Their brains were so jacked up they couldn't organize against their enslavers. Mm-hmm. Well, that same level as in our water supply here in the States. Well, I'll let you figure out what that is.
I think when it comes to fluoride, one thing you guys need to do is first check what your district water supply allows in, because it's actually different from, I know in Canada, it's different from province to province. The water supply is better in some areas, worse in others. Some fluoridate, some don't. So you need to kind of see what it is. But I really think at this day and age, everybody needs to have a good quality water purifier. You just do. And I would say even more important right now is it shouldn't even be one that's connected to your pipes. I like a gravity, like we use a Berkey water filter. I like that because it cleans out pathogens. It cleans out, you can get the specific ones for fluoride. You can get all of that stuff out, and it's a gravity filter. So it's like, if anything happened and we didn't even have access to water, then we could go literally take lake water and pour it in there, and we would have clean drinking water. So I think right now it's also really important, just make sure you've got access to something that can get clean drinking water. We can literally walk down where we are right at the moment in Vancouver Island. We can walk down and actually get like stream runoff water, and then we'll fill that and we'll dump that through the Berkey. But I think that's a no-brainer. At this point, I really think everybody should have a water purification system so that you're cleaning everything out. And then if you want, then you can put back in like some of the essential minerals and stuff like that. That's easy to add back in. But I think I mean, to me, that's a no-brainer, Ken, because water is one of the ways that we accumulate fluoride. Also, that's a big way that a lot of the different medications all still kind of get through. So people are getting a lot of the different medications.
Yeah, because especially in the States here, a lot of the cities along rivers take their water out of the river supply. Well, their filtration system cannot take out those medications that people do, and so you're getting like a medicated dose every time you take that water. So you really need, there's ozonators that can break that stuff down in the water, and some filters can take it out. So you'd really have to realize in a lot of places, obviously probably not in Vancouver Island, but a lot of places in the States and others, if you have to put your own secondary purification system in to take out what's ever in that water, because your city's not going to do it for you.
Yeah, and you don't want to go back after you've started to have filtered water. You really, like my kids, don't like regular water. They'll have them, they just taste funny to them if they ever have it. They're used to having filtered water now. So, and it's not crazy expensive to get some of these things. We even have a small one that we take whenever we travel. We've always got that, and then we'll even run, if we have to get bottled water, we'll still even often run that through the filtration system just to make sure that it's as clean as can
Oh,
be.
and that's another problem is all that microplastics.
Yeah.
Probably that was pretty much off people's radar until the last couple of years. And I mean, for most people, will eat a credit card's worth of microplastics in a week.
I
You
know. I
know,
read that too.
it's in food. It's in stuff, and that's that is not good. Now, a lot of the plastics maybe aren't a problem; they go right through, but probably some are, and the chemicals that come off of them probably are. So that's and that's it's in everything. That's just one of the packaging that people have, even in the water bottles. If you actually look at the microscope, electron microscope at a plastic, it looks smooth to you, but when you look at it, it's got ridges and valleys. It's like a super rough landscape, and pieces of that will break off and then get into your water. And then you drink that, and now you've got the microplastics. And if they're small enough, they'll get through the gut barrier, and then they're inside of you. So that's a problem.
Hmm. Yeah, and once those things often get inside the body, especially once they get inside the cell, it's not always easy to get them back out again right off the bat. So I think most of the toxins, when you break everything down, I think Ken kind of touched on this. I think you'll see most of these things when they are tested, and you can see they usually relate to being either carcinogenic or endocrine disruptors. Those are probably the two big things I would say they break down to. And carcinogenic would go hand in hand usually with increasing oxidative stress, which usually then increases inflammation and sort of sets a whole cascade of events in place. So anytime you can minimize that, better and better. Now, Ken, you said something too. You said that a lot of these industrial toxins have never been tested for safety. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think that might be surprising for people, because most people think if we're exposed to it, then it should be safe, or else why would they allow that to be out there? So what does that mean exactly? If it has been tested to be safe, or if it hasn't, what does that even mean?
Well, the thing is, yeah, they just really, I mean, they come up with a new chemical or a chemical that's close to an old chemical, and then they can use it, and they don't. It's because it's not in your food product. Maybe the FDA would stop at a food product, but it's in your clothes. It's like they use that bromine anti-fire stuff that has bromine chemicals, those forever bromine chemicals, because they attach bromines and fluorides to carbons. And those are really, really strong bonds, and so they don't break down, and they can jack with your endocrine system. And so that's in your clothing, it's in the care products that you have, and anything applied topically. And there's another thing, there's the 0.1% rule, and that's what the FDA has. And so if something's less than 0.1% of a product, they don't have to list it. So you could have things leaching out of the plastic containers into the product, but because it's 0.05%, they don't have to list it. And so you could just have a myriad, even though it adds up to a significant percentage, each one of them is below 0.1%. So they don't have to list it or even talk about it. And so in those ways, because they'll use, as I mentioned, the benzene that was in half the products, but there's lots of other things that they use that just kind of leach in. And so in the standard industrial products. So it's hard to avoid them all, but you really do have to put an effort up. Otherwise, you're just going to get massively contaminated.
Yeah, I think the thing is the more that you're at least aware of it, then you can start to make different choices to try to offset your exposure as best you can. One of the, and I've mentioned this study before, one of the groundbreaking studies that I remember reading that to me just illustrated how inundated everybody is, whether you know it or not, was that environmental working group study where they looked at the cord blood of newborns,
Oh
and they
yeah,
saw the degree of pesticides and heavy metals and different toxins that were already there, literally from day one from the cord blood of newborns. So
yeah.
that's not them even being exposed to the world. That's only being exposed through being in the womb, and they already came out loaded with tons of different stuff. So we are literally born in to this world with a certain level of toxicity. So you can only prevent so much. When we think about preventing or trying to avoid, what would be some of the top strategies that you would use as far as trying to avoid exposure that you don't need to actually
Well,
expose yourself to?
well, the first thing is to eat organic. whenever you can. And they found that they did a study and they found that if just eating organic for 2 weeks eliminated 90% of the pesticides and herbicides found in a person's body. So just 2 weeks of eating organic. So that's something that you should try. And then try to and also get fresh foods, other than, because anything in a can, you've got BPAs and
Yeah.
DHAs and whatever else leaching out from the lining into the food. That's just a common thing. So the fresh food, basically, if you go on the outside of your supermarket, that's
Yeah.
the healthy food. All the stuff on the inside, the processed stuff, that's not the healthy stuff for you. And so eating organic, and there's other, the same with, well, that's one. And also another thing people have is the electromagnetic environment you're in. We all know about ionizing radiation. That's like gamma rays and X-rays, right? And there's a lot of studies on how damaging that is. And but then there's all these other frequencies, lower frequencies, which don't, ionizing, it means it basically knocks an electron off an atom, and that makes an oxidative radical, just for people to tether. The non-ionizing are things in the microwave levels, right? And other radio wave levels. And they've always said, well, they look at the microwave exposure and they test how much it heats up, because microwaves heat up water, right? You're mostly water, so it's going to heat you up. So they said, oh, the damage that could be caused would be caused from the microwaves heating up your body. And if it doesn't heat your tissue up so much, then it's not a problem. Well, they've discovered since then, or other scientists have discovered since then, there's things called voltage-gated channels on your cells. And these basically let in the ions, like calcium ions and potassium and sodium ions and chlorine. They're kind of, because they're ions, are positively charged, negatively charged, and a voltage-gated channel, it's what let those in. Well, a lot of these frequencies, especially like the quote 5G frequencies, and a lot of the frequencies you can find on the servers in your house, or the remote communications with the computer, they're operating these frequencies, and they'll jam open those voltage-gated channels. And so things will leak out of the cells that shouldn't be. There are things that will leak in, especially calcium, will leak into your cells and just cause a huge amount of oxidative damage. And that's one of the reasons why, we all know about the numbers of cancers for people using cell phones right next to the head. That's something, yeah, if you do got your cell phone, put it on speaker and hold it out. Don't put it up against your head and bake your brain. Just put it on speaker and talk to it. That'll reduce, because it's the inverse square rule. If you double the distance, you've decreased the power by a fourth. So it's inverse square rule. So if you could put it out here and talking on your cell phone, well, the amount of radiation hitting your brain has gone down, 100-fold.
Yeah.
And so all of those things that you can do, those are all things you can do. And just because the authorities tell you it's safe, well, don't do that. There's lots of independent consumer groups and scientists out there that have a quite different view, and they're not being paid by big industry as a shills, which is pretty much most of our agencies today are just basically shills. If you look at virtually any regulatory agency, it's the industry group members will go purposely. They're given leave to go work for the government agency, who then, and when they get out, they'll go work for another industry group at even a higher salary as reward for doing that. And so the industry insiders are basically running all the 3-letter agencies that regulate safety, and no matter what it is. And so we have a really poor safety situation here, at least here in the States. I can't speak for other nations.
Oh yeah, I think that's almost global. I think we just maybe see it even more in North America in general. But yeah, I looked into a lot of that too for a while, and it's astounding when you start to look through it, how a lot of the people that are behind making some of the decisions it's a very incestuous sort of dynamic. It's like it's all interrelated. You can basically start to see where how could you get any really clear information being delivered, because it all seems so biased. And you'll see this when you look at certain studies that have no affiliate, if you can even find them anymore, studies that don't really have any affiliation with big industry, and then studies that are very much dictated by big industry. They often have very different outcomes. You'll see very different information.
Yeah,
I remember looking at that on the, I remember looking at information on the flu vaccine before, and I would see, Cochrane Review Board, and it was looking at a whole lot of like more university studies that weren't supported by big industry. And then it was looking at all of the big industry studies, and they showed a very different picture. One was saying very effective this, the other one was saying not effective at all. So this is where people get confused because the quote unquote science can really lead you down any path you want to. So you have to start to look into things and try to see as many sides as you can, and then figure out what you think makes most sense.
Oh yeah, they've even done that with C60.
Mm-hmm.
They've made targeted bullshit, basically. I don't know if you say that, reports. Like they had one where they say it doesn't extend lifespan of mice, but they only gave C60 to the mice once every 2 weeks, and they used a special type of mouse who's a hybrid type of two types of mouse whose chromosomes naturally disintegrate. So and their chromosomes are already disintegrating before they begin the test. So there's nothing C60 could have done for mice whose chromosomes disintegrate. So they use those specific mice, and then they use another type of mice that's super sensitive. It's one that's for UV toxins, and so it was totally made to fail.
Yeah,
And and you see those in a lot of studies for I guess supplements,
for
right?
sure.
This
Yeah.
is not effective or this is bad. Well, who's paying bills? And if you look carefully at the authors and the funding, you can find out. So it's really, you got to really read carefully, otherwise you can be deceived.
Oh, and it's tricky because the average person just doesn't have time to be able to do that,
Yeah.
nor do they have even the experience or the knowing of how to even read a study. Most of the time, when you actually start to go through and you look at how the whole study was done, you can see if it was set up in a way that's really is objective to see what's going on, or if it's really set up in a way that the outcome's already going to be there. Either you're setting it up to fail or you're setting it up to look like it's going to create really big results. But so you can only get so much with some of the stuff. I think some of the stuff that you mentioned earlier around foods, I think is really good information. So where you can eat organic. It's not that organic is completely clean. It's almost impossible at this point because everything gets cross-exposed to pesticides. I mean, and a lot of times you'll have an organic farm, and then it might be close by. It might be a farm that isn't organic, and you're going to get some stuff over, but you will definitely get less than you will from ones that are sprayed. And like you talked about with the study, you can minimize your load a lot when you can eat organic. I think also the whole foods in general, when you are eating foods with less ingredients in it, you're always a step ahead of the game. So like Ken talked about, do the periphery of the shopping mall. It's the same thing we often say too in the grocery store: periphery, produce, dairy, meats, like you're keeping around there. You try to avoid the packaged stuff. Get used to reading labels. I really think everybody needs to start reading labels, because a lot of times people pick, they have key things on there that say, green product, or, good for vegans, or cholesterol free, or whatever it might say. So it kind of grabs your eye thinking that it's something that is healthy, but go through and see. Sometimes even just how many ingredients do you find that just are really difficult to pronounce? Most of
There
the
is
time.
there is a rule for that for most people. If you can't pronounce the
Yeah.
word, you shouldn't be eating it.
Yep. And then when you use like an app like that Think Dirty app, it will break it down and it will show you which ones are some of the bigger offenders. So if you just start to familiarize yourself with some of that stuff, then you're back in the driver's seat when you're getting your food. So then you can even look between options. Okay, now this option is like a +7 and this one's a +3. Move to the +3. Just every time you're doing that, you're lowering your overall burden. The other one you talked about there, the one other point around that I think is really important is, this is something that we've been doing lots of for a while too, but it's like, if you're not used to it, start to learn how to cook some of your own foods, right? So even basics, it's like, this is what I'll do when I make pancakes for our kids. We will use something called, this is actually one of my favorite devices I've seen over the last while. It's called an almond cow. And again, I don't have any affiliation with almond cow, but I think they're an amazing product. Have you ever heard of this, Cam?
No.
So we like doing, if we'll either get raw milk once in a while if we can get it, or we will make our own almond milk or cashew milk or whatever milk we want to do, a nut milk or some kind of variation. So this almond cow, literally, you just put your stuff in. So I might do a little bit of organic gluten-free oats, a little bit of organic cashews, add a couple of dates, a little bit of vanilla, a bit of cinnamon. I plug this thing in, fill the thing up with water, stick it in, and it blends it up, and it makes my nut milk right there. I might let it sit overnight so it sort of soaks, but basically I can use that up, and then I've got my fresh nut milk in the morning, and then I can use the blended up sort of mix of the organic oats and the blended up cashews or almonds or macadamia nuts or whatever I want to use, and then I'll take that. I'll throw that into the mix with a couple of eggs and maybe a little bit of either like organic gluten-free oats or a whole grain kind of a flour that is an organic flour that's maybe low gluten, something along those lines. Blend all of that up and I can make pancakes from it right off the bat. So it's got like a lot of this beneficial stuff added into it rather than this package mix that I might grab that people use because it's easy. But you can start to do things your own, and you can make things that normally would not be healthy. Like I would generally say pancakes are not really a healthy option, but they can actually become a pretty healthy option if you doctor it up in a way where you're adding a whole bunch of benefits into it. So you can do that when you start to play with cooking your own foods a little bit. So play with it a little bit and also be aware of the ingredients you're in. I know that when I'm making my own foods, I'm not putting anything else in it than what I'm aware of. And so I keep my ingredients very minimal and only the ones that I want to use. So, get a few staples under your belt so that you know how to make some stuff when you can.
Yep. And
I think
also,
that's really helpful.
yeah, it's growing your own garden.
Yeah.
That is something that you can do yourself. A lot of people can do it, and you can get really fresh, good food right out of your garden. And a lot of places we have here where I'm at, there's a lot of people that raise their own chickens.
Yeah.
If you ever raise chickens, that I have, you're always going to have more eggs than you can use. So usually you sell them or you trade them with somebody around you. So if there's somebody probably raising chickens in your neighborhood, they probably have more eggs than they can use, and they'd be happy to trade for money or something else.
Yeah.
Eggs.
It's actually wonderful. We were just taking the kids out to a forest school to do a little tour out there the other day. And part of it is they have eggs, and the kids even go and they have to like feed the chickens, and they have to do different stuff too. And they kind of look after some of the different animals and stuff. And she goes in and pulls out a few eggs that the hens had laid and gave them to the girls as a gift. It's just really cute. Out here is really neat because you'll actually see we'll be driving by and there's all sorts of little local farmers that have little signs up, and they just have a little money box there, and they have a big basket full of eggs, and you just basically go in, take your box of eggs and leave your money, make your change and leave it and drive off. And I mean, I just love that there's even places where you can do that, where it's like honest enough where you can leave literally like your cash box right there unattended, and people go and just do it up themselves. But it's really awesome to be able to get farm fresh eggs too. If you eat eggs and they work for you, it's like it's such a different level of getting stuff fresh like that than it is getting it through the different layers that it has to go through in order to be in the supermarket most of the time.
Yeah, so they're just little things here and there. And I mean, also in your food, like one thing is fruit juices. It's one thing to eat the whole fruit because it has fibers and other things in there, and so it releases the fruit sugars slowly. Whereas if you juice stuff, a lot of times you're going to get yourself an insulin spike because all that fructose. The fructose doesn't cause the insulin spike; it's the glucose. But still, the
Mhm.
fructose has other problems like that. So, but nature made it fine. But when we find something like that, then it's not so good. So, try eating like whole fruits. Or the whole vegetables. A lot of them need steaming, but that's really important too.
Yeah, and if you do like juicing, your juicing should always be much lower on the fruits than some of the vegetables. So it shouldn't always be like this really sweet, juicy, fruity kind of drink. I mean, if we ever do juicing, it's like most of it's the greens with a little bit of maybe apple to sweeten it a little
Yeah.
bit or something like that. It shouldn't be this strong fruity drink. Otherwise, you are going to go up and down pretty quick with your blood sugar, and that's not really a good thing for you.
And the final thing thing that I support is intermittent fasting. No,
Hmm.
so I have tried, used to weigh about 200 and something pounds. And I had tried, I tried other diets and things, and I'd go down to like a certain level and I would just hit a floor. I did the three whites, no, flour, sugar, milk, right? And then whatever, this and that. But, and I always get down to a certain level. But when I discovered intermittent fasting, I was able to take my weight down to what I was in high school. And so I'm on the 6 hour diet. I only
Yeah.
eat 6 hours a day. And if you think about it, like for instance, look at the average American or average Canadian or whatever. What they get up in the morning, 7, what do they have? Some sort of breakfast. Then maybe they go to lunch, they have their lunch, and then they get home and they have their dinner. Now it's 6 or 7, and then they're watching TV and they have a late night snack, and it's 10 o'clock. And of course, it takes a while. So you've got your could have your digestive system working 18 hours a day, 20 hours a day. I mean, if you physically worked 18 hours a day, you would be completely exhausted. And the same thing happens to your digestive system. So you need to limit the, especially as you get older, limit the time that your digestive system has to work and give it time to rest and recover for the next thing. And also I had some digestive problems before intermittent fasting. Now I don't have any. They just
Yeah.
all went away just because I give my digestive system a rest between meals so it could do its job so much better.
Yeah, I think it's really important to try out some of these different things and see how it feels on your body. I personally, I really like intermittent fasting too. It works really well for me. And after a while, it's like it's not a big deal. I mean, really, you can wake up in the morning and have a tea, or even if you want, have like a black coffee or something like that if you feel like it. But you really don't. A lot of times I don't even have a hunger until I hit around 2 o'clock a lot of times now. I would say even sometimes my window would stretch between 8 hours to sometimes 2 hours. Like sometimes it's just that's just sort of what it feels like. And then other days I feel like eating a little bit more throughout the day. So you don't have to be super strict with it, but try them out and see. Because if you remember, Ken was talking about a lot of times these toxins get stored in fat. So a lot of times, in order to actually lower our body burden, weight loss is also, I should say, fat loss is also an important part of lowering your overall body burden. But you do have to support it because that's where a lot of times people go through these really bad detox reactions that we hear about sometimes, or, that can be a Herx reaction or some of these different things too. But when you are, and we'll talk about that in just a bit, I want to come to the part where what do we do to actually start to, once we've accumulated, how do we start to move it down? I just want to finish a couple parts around what we need to first try to avoid, but then we're going to come back and talk about that part in just a bit. So Ken, let's look at some of the things. So some of I think the good charts to bring up are the Dirty Dozen and the Clean 15. So maybe talk a little bit about that. And I'm gonna share the screen here, and I'm gonna bring that up so that people can
Oh,
take a look at it, because I think those are good charts and they're good doables. You see that stuff, and then you can start to incorporate that into your diet when you're being aware of it. So what is
yeah.
the Dirty Dozen, Ken?
Basically, there's some fruits and stuff that I've got. Like here, let me get that off. It's just here we go. Yeah, there's some fruits that just because their nature, they're maybe really susceptible to insects or fungi or something else. They spray them a lot, and that means you got herbicides and pesticides that build up in these fruits. And so, and you can see like apples, you've seen, if you've ever had raised your own apples, a lot of those apples get worms in them, right? And strawberries the same way. So you see all of these, and these ones just by their nature have a lot of pesticides and herbicides or fungicides on them. And so these are the ones that you should really look to buy organic. Absolutely. Any of the things on here, because usually they're just being slathered in herbicides and pesticides or whatever, usually pesticides. And so if you do that, that'll be that will reduce your burden. Or a lot of these you can grow yourself, like strawberries and tomatoes and spinach and kale. I mean, I have all of those growing and even celery. I have all of those growing in my garden right now.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, we've
so
got those guys in there too, and I know some people don't have space for a garden, or a lot of times we don't have time for a garden. But I think also whenever this is an important thing to start to try to figure out how do we carve out time to incorporate some of these different things, because ultimately I think these things are really important, and sometimes we do need to find ways to start to change our schedule a little bit to make more room to do some of this stuff. I mean, when we first started, it was just like a few pots in the house. You know, we didn't have a lot of space, but we just started to do it. You can even get these hydroponic stuff now where you've got, you know, literally they're just growing out of these. It's almost like a little tree you put in your house that has pots in it, and they're just growing out all sorts of different stuff. So you can find different ways to grow things at home. But if you've got kids, it's a great practice to do with your kids too. You know, our kids get used to doing it. They get used to picking like the mint leaves and the basil leaves, and they get used to all this different stuff and tasting it, and then they get used to putting it on their food. So it's like, you know, you start to, there's so many different layers that I think growing your own food, even in little bits, especially with kids too, they grow up sort of with an appreciation for it. And
Yeah,
on
and
this dirty dozen list, you'll see like strawberries and
oh
spinach were the
yeah,
worst offenders for 4 years in a row. So,
and those are easy to grow. Those are two plants that are easy to grow. So that's something you might consider. Another thing people could do is they could get farm shares.
mhm.
And we have farm shares in where I'm living, a lot of them. And so you can get like a farmer, you buy into it, and whatever crop is ripe, they'll drop a box in front of your house every week or a couple times a week for your family. And so that way, and that's also too with raw milk. They have, you can buy a share in a cow, and then you can get your, and because you're an owner of the quote owner of the cow, you can actually get access to that raw meat, to that raw milk.
Yeah, pretty much I think I know in Canada, if you're going to be able to get raw milk at all, you literally have to be a part of owner of the farm is how they usually set up, or of the cow. So, and that's the way that you end up kind of connecting in with those farmers and be able to get access to that. And Ken, what's the clean 15?
Well, these are plants that usually have that have the least level of pesticides because they're, a lot of them we like pineapple and tropical onions and stuff. The avocados, these grow on trees, and they also they're just the nature of the plant itself is very resistant to insects and fungi, and so that you can so they just have low levels of pesticide burden. Like asparagus, I mean, I don't know if people have ever raised asparagus, but basically the plants are pretty big and fluffy, the branches, but when in the spring when they come up, they're just the sprouts. So there's nothing around that's going to infect them or do that. So they just cut it off at the ground and send it to you. And when the plant grows and it doesn't get any pesticides. And so these are just some of the ones. Same with kiwi. Most of that comes in California and New Zealand or something. But those actually came from China. The kiwi came from China, so there's nothing, no bugs that eat it in the places it's growing now. So you don't have to worry about that. And so,
So
that's just, these are ones you probably don't have to worry as much for pesticides and herbicides. And they're not genetically engineered either, most of these.
nice. So for those of you that are on a budget when it comes to organic, you're trying to figure out, okay, I can't get everything organic. This would be a good idea to narrow down where you should start, what's the most important, and the ones that you don't have to worry about so much. So the clean 15 are the things like, for those of you that aren't watching this, avocados, sweet corn, pineapple, onions, papaya, sweet peas, eggplants, asparagus, cauliflower, cantaloupe, broccoli, mushrooms, cabbage, honeydew melon, kiwi. And those are the ones that generally they found lower levels of detectable pesticides on. For the dirty dozen, these are the ones that you would want to be very diligent about trying to get organic whenever you can, would be strawberries, spinach, kale, nectarines, apples, grapes, peaches, cherries, pears, tomatoes, celery, potatoes. And the two worst ones were strawberries and spinach. So those would be where you want to focus on your budget when you are looking at getting some of the stuff organic.
Yeah. And it's, yes, organic costs more than just the generic stuff at the store, but how valuable is your health?
Yeah.
If you don't have health, that's pretty bad. So it's something you need to dedicate to. And the simpler the foods, the better. And it's the same with fish out of the sea. That's something we also should mention. They've
Yeah.
been, because they have so many coal plants, and coal is like a filter as water goes through it. So there's a lot of mercury that gets caught in the coal. And when they burn it, especially in India and China, they don't have filters on it. And it just goes out and contaminates the environment, gets in the sea. So you want to eat low on the food chain. So instead of eating tuna, eat sardines.
Mhm.
Shrimp and some of that lower stuff is thing, but like swordfish is really bad. It's so full of mercury. So is tuna. The higher it is up on the food chain, the more the toxins get concentrated. So eat lower. You can eat like and some certain types of fish are in different parts of the water column, so they have different levels of things. So herring is fine,
Yeah.
sardines, and also actually the salmon, wild caught salmon you want to have versus farm salmon, because that just has so many different contaminants, from a lot from the food that they feed it, and the fact that it's in these pens and there's all kinds of disease. So it's those are important things to avoid, the heavy metal buildup.
Yeah, and it can be hard to even get wild salmon anymore. But yeah, so think like smaller fish. Smaller fish are better. The bigger fish that eat the smaller fish, then the metals bioaccumulate, and then you're getting a bigger and bigger burden of it. So you got to definitely minimize that. I mean, you look at tuna, some people eat a lot of tuna. I remember checking some back in clinic, I would see like some bodybuilders that were eating a lot of tuna because it was like a really clean protein, according to them, and their mercury levels were off the charts. So you can bioaccumulate it really, really quickly. And metals can be a tricky one because metals, once they get inside the cell, can be harder to get out of the cell. And it's actually something I'm looking at, even creating a study around on measuring using more of a spectrometer device to look at metal load throughout the entire body, and
we,
then looking.
we have some experience with that with C60. One of
Mm,
the things is people that have a lot of mouth metal still have their metal fillings. When they first start taking C60, they get a metallic taste in their mouth.
yeah.
Goes away after a few days, and what it is, it seems that C60s, it's about 3 or 4 times larger than the mercury atom, but it has a similar positive 2 charge. And so it tends to dislodge or inorganic mercury from wherever it's at. And because you're taking it in the milligrams and mercury is usually in the micrograms, it prevents its redeposition so the body can flush it. And also they found that C60 will turn mercury hydroxide, it'll catalyze it into mercury oxide. Just a tiny bit. They've actually done that in the lab. Just a tiny bit of C60, the whole thing just turns mercury hydroxide. And oxides are not biologically available as much, and the body can actually seize those metal oxides and dump them out of the body through chelation, much easier than it can with a hydroxide. But the other stuff is like methyl mercury. That's pure death. Even a drop of that will kill an elephant. So so that's the stuff. That's some of the bio stuff that you really want to stay away from.
Yeah, good point. The metals are a big one. When I think of toxins, I think of all the pesticides, insecticides, that kind of stuff that we're being exposed to. I think of the endocrine disruptors, which are mostly in our plastics, that sort of stuff. Think of all the heavy metals, which are coming through in lots of things, from cosmetics as well as from accumulation in fish. I think where we're getting a lot of it. I think a lot of stuff that gets just in the air, the quality in the air, stuff that's sprayed, all sorts of different things that I think we're accumulating a lot of different metals. And then the other one would be like endogenous toxins, from
Oh,
infections and things like that too.
yeah, I forgot on the cooking part. I was going to mention it. No aluminum pans.
Hmm.
Do not. And there's also some of those. What do you call those?
The
Cooking.
Teflon and the
No, yeah, the Teflon ones that releases fluorides. But there's also cooking baking powder, right? There is some aluminum-based baking powder. Do not use that. They have ones that are like, whatever it is, sodium bicarbonates, right? So whatever. That's the baking powder you want. You read your baking powders. If it has aluminum in it, throw that in the trash can, because
mhm,
that's one way. And of course, the worst, of course, of all is for aluminum, because that's
adjuvant and a lot of the
methyl. It's mercury ether, I think, or ethyl mercury,
ethyl
and that
mercury, I think.
is
Yeah.
in that stuff that goes right to your brain. So you don't want that adjutant ever in anything.
Yeah.
That's aluminum. The aluminum hydroxide they also put in that also bioaccumulates really much. So you just want to stay away from that as much as possible.
Yeah, I think getting your levels of metals tested, you can do them in a variety of ways. I think we're gradually getting more and more um, dialed in on how to really assess body burden of metals. And sometimes you have to assess in a few different ways to figure out what's going on. But I do think getting your heavy metals tested to see where you're actually at and then working with that, I think that's a really important one. That's fascinating though, Ken, about the C60 with the being able to switch it from a hydroxide to an oxide. So
Yeah, it does it all by itself.
that's fascinating. Okay, last step here then is Well, let's pull this up for people just so they can kind of see too, because I've got it here. And let me pull this up on skincare because this is a big one. I mean, both men and women, but I say women probably a little bit more on the
Yes.
skincare products than men.
Yeah,
And
that's why when I mentioned like you're exposed to 300 to 500 toxic chemicals before you
yeah,
leave the door in the morning, the 300 was for guys, the 500 was for women, and the reason that extra 200 was especially this personal like beauty products and healthcare products.
yeah. So I was pulling up a chart here just of the top 10 most toxic skincare ingredients to avoid. And again, these are things that you want to use your Think Dirty app, check your products out, and really, I think that's probably the easiest way for most people to try to minimize. It's like get used to using something like that, see what your rating is, and keep trying to find something that is lower. I know sometimes this is hard for people when they find products that they really like, but bottom line is like if it's not good for you, whatever benefits you're getting are temporary, and it's going to be creating a larger body burden that can create downstream health problems over time. So some of these big ones can hydroquinone, coal tar, SLS or SLES, mineral oil, triclosan in Colgate,
Yeah.
fragrance, phthalates, aluminum, formaldehyde. These are
Yes.
some of the big ones that you're going to see. Anything else that jumps out at you, Ken, or any other
Uh,
comments around that?
well, generally there's the one that's the PBAs and other things. Anything in a plastic packaging, they have like there's some plastics that are okay, and those are like the heat injected plastics. They have to heat those. They have little plastic beads. I worked with that, and they heat them up until they're molten, and then they inject them into a mold, and then it cools down. But a lot of plastics have these plasticizers in them, and that makes them soft and flexible. And those generally are estrogen imitators.
Yeah.
So if you have a hard plastic, it might be okay, but you probably should avoid it and get glass if you can. But if you've got a flexible plastic, like in those little squeeze bottles, chances are you've got some of those plasticizers leaching out and getting into whatever materials in that package, or even on your hands. Oh, another thing is, the receipts you get off the from the grocery store, those are just full of like nasty toxic chemicals, the chemicals that allow them to use heat to print the numbers, right? Because that's what's going on in there. They're not actually printing, they're heat printing. Those actually can get off on your hands. You want to avoid touching receipts as much as possible because they are just so toxic.
It's so crazy sometimes the amount of stuff that you got to be aware of. Um, but at the same point, once you start to become aware of some of it, it's actually not that big of a deal. It's just you start to live your life in a certain way where you just avoid a lot of stuff and you just don't want to interact with certain things. So you had also talked about the VOC. So this was like the off gassing. So
Yes.
this is important because one of the things when we were you'll have to see this like in taxis or when we were in Mexico, we would see this all the time. People always had their little fake smelling stuff in the taxis, or they'd
Yes.
have it sitting right on the air conditioner, shooting it out. And I'd be constantly like taking that and putting it in the glove compartment when we were in a taxi or something along those lines. And or the little smelly sense that you plug into your outlet and
Yes.
it pumps this stuff out. I mean, you got to remember, like the vast majority of all this stuff, it's all chemicals. So you're just creating this on an ongoing basis. So I just pulled up a chart here on sources of VOC. And so this is what Ken was talking about with the off gassing. So Ken, you want to run through some of these ones and just sort of where people need to be
We
aware of where this stuff actually happens?
Well, obviously in your car, that's the new car smell. But let's talk about your house. Well, look at carpets. When you get the new carpet smell, well, that's nasty VOCs that you're smelling, and they're bad for you. And obviously, all the things like the fabric softeners, the air fresheners. I mean, it smells great. A lot of things they'll put in like the fragrances. It can smell good to your nose, but it's really kind of a nasty chemical that's imitating something else, and it's not good for you. And then so you have all these different things. Laminates. That's basically glues. Basically, you have glues, use them, and then the part of the glue evaporates off, and that's what makes it hard. But if you've ever done like models when you're a kid, did
Mhm.
model,
Oh yeah, yeah.
it's that stuff. Well, that's not good for you, right? It's messing you up. And furniture, obviously, sure, part of furniture is wood, but the rest of it's plastics and a lot of foam. Foams are really notorious for releasing VOCs. And then on the other side here, this is more like the guy side. This is what you're going to find in the garage,
Yeah.
right? Like paint solvents, hopefully not tobacco smoke, stored fuels, lubricants, auto parts because they got oil on that, and all that stuff that, you can find in the garage. You go out and have that garage smell. Well, that's VOCs, and that smell is what you're smelling is probably not good for you, especially the benzene and gasoline and other like petroleum products. So it's not just the in-store, it's also the garage and elsewhere.
Yeah. So the thing is we're all going to be exposed to these things to a point. So the two parts for us to try and take control back of our health is first, be aware of them so you can try to minimize exposure as best you can. Put things in place where you can gradually make, if you're in a big amount of exposure to some of that stuff, then see where you can start to put in place and make some changes in your life to see if you can start to change that so that you don't have to be exposed so much. I get it. Sometimes people, that's their profession. They're involved in that to a big degree. Well, just see how that's affecting over time. If there's a way that you can start to change things, then put things in motion to start to change it so you're not going to be dealing with it, because these things will over time create ill health. They are related to a lot of that stuff. And one of the things that we talked about earlier is that individually, a lot of these chemicals might say, oh, they're safe in this dosage or whatever, but there's no studies to look at the bioaccumulation of all of these different things that you're being exposed to, often at the same time. That nobody knows. That's just a big, when we wonder, like, why are cancers going up? Why do autoimmune disease go up? Why do all these endocrine diseases go up? Like all of this stuff, to me, this is one of the big logs in the fire that's probably playing into it.
Yeah, and people, this stuff is multiplicative or exponential. So like if you got two, and it's not like you got two of this and two of that and two of that. Oh, you add it up and that's six, right? No,
Yeah.
it's like
Logarithmic.
yeah, logarithmic. So it's four. It's like, yeah, so it's 32 would be your thing, and so it goes up like that. And when you put the multiples, because sometimes mercury and aluminum together, mercury by itself causes damage. Aluminum causes damage, but when you put both mercury and aluminum together, it causes 10 times the damage of either one of those alone. And so because they work in different ways, they even do damage. So basically the best thing you can do is avoid it all. And then you have to come with ways to protect yourself. Now,
Right.
A lot of the metals, there's chelation. They have zeolites that people get. You can take zeolites. They tend to bind up some of these heavy metals, pull them out of the body. You got to be careful with zeolites because they'll bind up other metals you need, like calcium and magnesium and stuff. So you have to be careful with that. So that's things that you can do, and avoidance and a few things and is really the best you can. Of course, C60 is part of that because C60, as a lot of these chemicals break down in your body, they produce very strong oxidative radicals. And then those oxidative radicals do the damage. C60 can neutralize those oxidative radicals. Like this is an animal study, so it doesn't directly portray, but like in the Botry study where they, doubled the lifespan of animals by 90%, giving them C60 Worcester rats. They also, while they were waiting for the 5.5 years during the study, they did some others, and they gave one of them was carbon tetrachloride. Was once used dry cleaning. You dry clean your clothes, they use really nasty solvents to clean them, to get that clean, right? And they get them clean. Unfortunately, they don't get all those solvents out of your clothes. And so when you wear the clothes, those solvents get into you. And one of them is carbon tetrachloride. I think it's been banned now, but they used to use carbon tetrachloride. And they did that with the rats. They gave, one set of rats got the carbon tetrachloride. The other rats got the carbon tetrachloride plus C60. And the C60 rats didn't have any damage to their livers from the carbon tetrachloride compared to the control rats, so the rats that got it. And so that's because C60 got, and it's not that it protects against the chemical, it protects against the oxidative radicals produced in the breakdown of that chemical in the body. And that's kind of how it works. And one of the things about C60, it can reset itself. It's kind of a unique molecule, and that it's here's like, oh well, I guess I could put it in front of me there. Screensaver. You can see it behind me in there. It's a carbon molecule shaped 60 carbon atoms shaped exactly like a little soccer ball. And it's unique in the chemical world that it actually stores, most chemicals, it likes to have a positive charge because of its electron bonding structure. But most molecules give up an electron to the environment to do that. And then that makes them positive charge. C60 actually pulls positively charged hydrogen ions from the outside of the environment and stores it on the inside of this cage-like structure. and then releases those when a negatively charged oxidative radical sticks to it, like superoxide or the hydroxyl radical or a few other really strong ones. And then it releases the hydrogen ion, which either turns it back to oxygen or water or whatever and neutralizes it. And then the C60 can reset itself. And that's why it's characterized as several hundred times more powerful than conventional antioxidants, because it can reset itself again and again. It doesn't need, like most things like glutathione or catalase or CoQ10, when they combine with an oxidative radical, they kind of changes their structure. Then the body has to take it with an enzyme and some ATP and then reset that that antioxidant. And that takes time and energy, whereas C60 does it almost immediately, and it doesn't burden the body's metabolism to do that either.
Mm-hmm. It's a really fascinating molecule, and it's one of those things where I feel like it's got so many potential benefits because of the way that it works, and because it works at such a root level of where I think so much illness and disease stems from, which is usually free radical load on the body, because that sort of offsets a lot of other problems. So anything that starts to mitigate some of that type of damage, I think you get a lot of downstream effects when you can start to incorporate it. It's definitely one of those safe ones I think can be used for almost everybody, whether you're just wanting to, you know, mitigate any of the wear and tear from aging to specifically working with, minimizing chronic illness. I think you can kind of use it for just about everything.
Yeah, well, one of the key differences between C60 and antioxidants is that C60 only reacts with the superoxide. That's an oxygen with an extra electron, the hydroxyl ion, which is basically a water molecule missing its proton. Those are the two highest energy oxidative radicals in the body, the most damaging oxidative radicals in the body. And the body doesn't use that for signaling molecules. And C60 only interacts with them. C60 doesn't interact with any of the body's signaling molecules, like some oxidative radicals you need, like the nitrogen oxides. Nitrogen oxides are vasodilators. They extend your capillaries or shrink them, and that's super important, especially for guys, right? So it doesn't interfere with that. It doesn't interact with hydrogen peroxide. And then there's a whole bunch built around iron, sulfur, and zinc. They're oxidative radicals the body uses for signaling molecules, and it doesn't interact with any of them. I mean, they gave rats like 1 gram per kilogram of body weight of C60, which is 10,000 times what's been found to be a health beneficial dose, and there was no toxicity. See, that's totally different with vitamin E, vitamin D. Or if you gave that levels to an animal, it probably would kill them. But C60 didn't do that. Now, that doesn't mean you shouldn't be taking vitamin E and vitamin D and vitamin C, because they're not just antioxidants. They're also critical building blocks for a wide variety of reactions in your body. They're part of the building blocks.
Yeah.
So don't think that C60 is a magic bullet that's going to stop things. It's one tool in the toolbox, and it does specific tasks. But you got to have the rest of those tools in the toolbox if you're looking for good health.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no magic bullet with anything. I think the biggest magic bullet is just really fine tuning and living an overall healthier and healthier and healthier lifestyle on all levels. And then the supplements and different pieces are like, you can get a lot of bang for your buck when you've got all the rest of the stuff in line, right? When you're trying to decrease the exposure of what you're doing from all the different levels, from physical, mental, emotional, all that stuff, living a healthy, clean life. And then these other pieces can really help to, I think, clean the environment up and give you more benefits over the long term. A couple other points I want to make around just detoxification in general. When you're thinking about detoxification, you got to remember, think about the big systems related to detoxification. And whenever you're starting to detoxify from any of this stuff that we're talking about, make sure your systems are working properly. So digestion, big system. You don't want to start a big detoxification if you're not having a bowel movement every couple of weeks. All right, like make sure that your bowels are moving properly. You got to make sure things are going to get out when you're going to start to clean things up. So you got to make sure your bowels are working okay. You got to make sure that you support liver and gallbladder function. You got to make sure that your kidneys are supported. And so that's usually when we just say drinking lots of water, keeping everything flowing through that. You can do stuff like dry skin brushing and things like that for your skin. Skin's a big organ of elimination that we really don't utilize very much. So that's where sauna detox and these types of things can also be beneficial. There's lots of things that you can do on a regular basis just to support those systems to work better. This is where exercise, even, just walking, getting up a little bit of a sweat. We talked about the importance of fat loss because so many toxins are held there. So when we start to do some of this other stuff and you start to then burn that fat, you release the toxins. Now that's where we use things like C60 and some of these different supplements that you heard from like some of the different guests. Go listen to the episode we did with David Avocado Wolf too. He's got a lot of different information on there as far as things even assist with binding up the toxins once they do get released so that we can also release them from the body. So lots of different information around that. But I think this was a really great one for breaking down where we're getting some of this accumulation from and some of the ways that we can start to strategize our lives so that we can mitigate the exposure. And then once they are there, what do we do to start to try to get them out again? Ken, any last words on anything there that you think would be important for the audience to hear?
Well, I think maybe one thing we didn't really go over is the mental toxins.
Hmm.
I mean, they found that people going off of social media did amazing things for people's mental health.
Yeah.
And it's just like the television news. In the evening, it's nothing but fear porn. And they're trying to snap you into that fright reaction so that they can sell you products through mental manipulation. So, I mean, and of course, as we all know, toxic relationships. Toxic relationships can be, I know from personal experience, can be more damaging than a whole lot of other things. So that whole mental space, that head space, getting rid of the toxins and the there is I think another really important thing that we need to do.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, as people know when they follow this, we talk about all the different bodies of health. So we've got some episodes where we've talked about spiritual detox. We've talked about one coming up with Dr. Amy Marshall. We're going to be interviewing her tomorrow, and we're doing specifically around emotional detox tied with the biofield and how we actually get rid of some of this emotional static that's accumulated through our lifetime and through traumas and all sorts of things. So these are all big picture pieces too that all need to be addressed. But you kind of see like the different layers of it, right? And all of this is really, how do you just become aware of it? How do you take charge and get back to being the own authority for your own body and mind and spirit and everything so that you start to live your own life? So much of this is just being aware of some of the information so that you can start to make different choices and really take the power back into your own hands. Because I know when you do, and I've seen this over and over again with patients, when they do, when they learn some of the information, they start to make different decisions. Like it's like something wakes up inside of them. There's a bigger zest for life. They're kind of don't feel like they're just sort of on this rat race. They start to make different decisions and they start to really open up and change their life in beneficial ways. Sometimes just starting with what you can do to help to moderate and fix your own health puts you in the state to make a lot of different changes in your life too. And when you were talking about fight or flight, these things that put you in fight or flight, different episodes that we've talked about, one of the first things I said before you even begin a detoxification program, you have to get out of fight or flight because you can't really detox when you're in fight or flight. It's not really the step for that, right? You're not really set up to detoxify. You need to be more in that parasympathetic dominance, more that rest and digest, where then you can start to break everything down a little bit better and work with it. All right, I think that's a wrap, Ken. I think we covered everything there as best as we can.
Yes, it's an infinite almost size thing, but yeah, just the basics. And you can't be perfect is the enemy of good enough. I mean, you get the job done. You're never going to be perfect. I mean, you're going to go out to eat. You're going to do that, but there's things you can do to mitigate that. So just do the best job. Start with one step at a time. They say the journey of 1,000 miles starts with one step. So just a few steps at a time and things that you can easily do. And simple habit changes. Just make sure you do them. If you do the habit basically once every day for a month, it becomes a habit. So just a dedication. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. Whatever. And after a month, it kind of you just automatically do it.
Yeah, I say if you want a couple of good take homes to go there where you could start, it's like get a stand-up gravity filtration for your water. Start drinking clean water and lots of it. Probably look at your dirty dozen list. So if you want to start to incorporate some organic, start there. Okay, if you're eating some of those foods, that would be the number one place to probably start, would be that. And get the app, get that free app, Think Dirty, and just start to become aware of the products you're using, and then actively check to see if you can start to move to a lower and lower number. Those would be really great places to just begin the process of starting to be aware of what's going on and then starting to make some changes so you can lower your overall threshold. I think that's a wrap, Ken. I think we covered lots there. So
Okay, great.